I'm Emily Chang, and this is the best of Bloomberg Technology, where we bring you all our top interviews from the week in tech. Coming up, big tech goes to Washington. Representatives from Twitter, Google, and Facebook descend on the nation's capital to offer answers on Russian interference in the 2016 election. Plus, after the hearings, what's next? Facebook increases security spending while Twitter changes its policies on political ads. Is that enough to avoid government regulation? And shares of tech companies continue to rally as firms report quarterly results. From Apple to Facebook, we have the biggest highlights from earnings season. First, to our lead. Facebook, Twitter, and Google go to Washington. Executives for all three firms appeared before three congressional committees this week to answer questions on how Russia manipulated their platforms to influence the 2016 U.S. election. Facebook, Google, and Twitter told Congress they aren't sure they've measured the full extent of Russia's manipulation of social networks in last year's U.S. presidential campaign, and they don't yet have the technology to prevent it from happening again. I caught up with former Twitter CEO Dick Costolo and co-founder of Chorus to get his reaction.
I think I would separate it into two things. I think they have a responsibility once they've understood the problem and the issue to discover the scope of it and then go address it. And I think they're doing that. I think it would be a mistake to say they bear responsibility for missing it. This is stuff that's come to light after the elections. It wasn't anything I think anyone knew had happened in previous elections, so make sure we get out ahead of it this time. Everyone's been seemingly surprised by it, and it's now a matter of doing the detective work to figure out just how deep and broad it was, and then go attack that as quickly as possible.
Twitter has already announced some changes. What changes do you think Twitter should?
Well, I think Jack has made a pretty broad and aggressive statement about we're going to be more transparent about political ads that are purchased, all political ads that are purchased, and we're going to be more aggressive on abuse. I think those are great steps. And as I said when I was CEO, I'd like to see us be a lot more aggressive. So I'm happy to see him doing that. The
ads are one thing, but some people say the ads really aren't the real problem. It's the number of fake accounts, the number of people pretending to be somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, you saw, again, Twitter said yesterday, I think, in the hearings that they think 5% of the accounts on the platform are bots.
Do you agree with that? Because some people think it's a lot more.
Well, again, there are two things I'd say about this. One, I trust the folks inside the company. If they're giving a number publicly, particularly in front of Senate and House hearings, I expect that they believe that that's the correct number. The thing you have to remember about there's the sort of sometimes there are researchers that come out and say, well, the number's actually a lot higher than that, and here's our data. They're going off some of these raw API feeds, and by raw API feeds, I mean they're looking at the tweets that are coming through these programming interfaces before Twitter delivers them to users.
Is it true that to some degree these networks are essentially ungovernable because you have hundreds of people trying to monitor more than 300 million accounts?
No, I don't think that's true. I think you can apply all sorts of machine learning techniques and other kinds of algorithms to do the things that you should be doing and be doing a better job of, like protecting the community and making sure that the information that's being delivered on the platform to the greatest extent possible is not foreign propaganda and fake news, to use the sort of the term of the day.
Keith Raboy of Khosla Ventures was on the show yesterday, and he called these proceedings essentially fraudulent. Actually, he used the word fraudulent because
that doesn't surprise me.
He believes that it's completely ridiculous to blame these companies, these social networks, for potentially swaying the election and spreading misinformation when there's a broad spectrum of what misinformation actually is. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I'll try to take a more nuanced approach to the answer. Look, on the one hand, you could say, well, people lie on TV all the time. You can point to, one or two news networks and say, well, that was not even remotely true. So it's not Facebook, Twitter, and Google's problem. It's everybody's problem. My position is a little bit more. Look, we all have to take responsibility for trying to prevent this from happening again. and as the leaders in the technology field that are delivering a lot of this information to users using algorithms that we think are best suited to deliver them the right information, we need to bear responsibility for addressing this. I do think, I watched some of the hearings yesterday morning and was very proud of Sean Edgett from Twitter's counsel, who is there and is one of the more ethical people you could ever get to meet. I do think that it would have been better if those hearings were more about problem solving and finding solutions and less about political theater. You know, you get these long-winded statements that come with sort of questions in the form of an accusation that seem to be designed to make the person answering the question look either complicit or stupid. You know, choose one. And I would like to see them be more about, let's work together to find solutions and problem solve instead of blaming people and trying to get on the evening news.
Do you think Twitter's a media company? And if so, what's its responsibility to vet what's published?
It's certainly in the media business. You know, there's a sense in Silicon Valley that these companies are platforms and only responsible for distributing information and not making editorial decisions. The fact is, and I think Jack has acknowledged this, is that these companies, all of them, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, make editorial decisions all the time. We're going to suspend this account. This doesn't meet our standard for nudity or pornography or whatever, so it can stay. This one doesn't meet it, so it has to go. So I think that these companies need to admit, if you will, hey, we make editorial decisions all the time, and we need to live with that and understand that being in the media business, even if we're a technology company, means that we're going to have to take more responsibility for those editorial decisions.
So what are some solutions as you see them?
I mean, one sort of simple...
You know how hard this is.
Yeah. Listen, also, let's be clear. The ads aren't, like, coming from, like, Uncle Vladimir, you know, wanting to pay for Cornhusker moms for Trump. That's not like it, you know, it's not that simple, right? I do think you should probably only take political ads from organizations that are registered in the country in which the election is taking place. That sort of seems like an easy one. And things like that don't let the election fall outside the bounds of that region in which the election is taking place, or its influence start to extend out of bounds of the region in which that election is taking place. That seems like sort of a simple and obvious one to me. The problem with legislation around just things like transparency are that the organizations aren't going to name themselves like, you know, the former Soviet Republic of so-and-so, for they're going to name themselves something that sounds like, you know, hey, that sounds like the Iowa or California, you know, grassroots Republican organization or Democrat organization. So it's got to be more about making sure that the organizations themselves are registered and paying taxes and filing their forms, et cetera, in the countries or regions in which these elections are taking place. You've been very vocal about harassment on these platforms, and I'm curious for your reaction. Twitter has said they're going to change the way they approach harassment. They're going to be more transparent about the way they approach harassment. This in the wake of the Me Too campaign, the Harvey Weinstein allegations, actress Rose McGowan, her account getting suspended as she was talking about being sexually assaulted. Do you think it's too little too late for Twitter, or that Twitter can actually get this problem under control? I think it's a problem that they should address. Jack knows they need to address it, and they should be more aggressive in addressing it. And the same was true when I was CEO. So I don't think it's too little too late. It's one of the most vital and important platforms in the world. It's literally the way to get information or your opinion about something out in a moment. And it will be that way for years to come. And, you know, great, start now, get more aggressive now. Is it a matter of, you know, being more... Also, I don't think it's as... Let me just add one thing to that. You know, the word that's used is transparent. I think what would also be helpful is for these organizations to provide context for why a certain decision was made. It's one thing to just say, we made this decision because of this specific tweet, but then people might draw the wrong conclusions from that. It would be helpful. I get how hard this is, believe me. You could spend all day doing it. But it would be helpful to say, we made this decision about this specific piece of content for these kinds of reasons. And that might not solve all your problems or answer everybody's questions, but at least it'll start to give people a better understanding of what's going on behind the scenes and why some of these issues are as challenging as they are.
That was Dick Costolo, former Twitter CEO and CEO of Chorus. And a reminder, Bloomberg LP, the parent company of Bloomberg News, is developing a global news network with Twitter. Coming up, Apple reports earnings results along with new details on demand for its new lineup of iPhones. Details just ahead. And later, Congress grilled lawyers from Google, Facebook, and Twitter this week. So were lawmakers satisfied? We'll hear from Congressman Chris Stewart of Utah. This is Bloomberg. Shares of Apple have soared more than 40% this year, in part due to anticipation for the most important new product from the company in years, the iPhone X. Its latest earnings results were crucial for Apple investors looking for insights into demand for the iPhone X going into the holiday season, plus new updates on the iPhone 8 and China. Julie Osk, an analyst with Forrester Research, joined us for a reaction to the results.
I think it's certainly a bold move to sell a device for $1,000, but it proves that demand for their devices, remains strong.
Now, we've been looking at wait times of 5 to 6 weeks, which is longer than any phone previously, and suggests some supply issues. But I did ask Tim Cook about this when I spoke to him on the phone just moments ago, and he didn't seem too worried about it. He said, this is simply the most advanced iPhone ever. We're just getting started, but I'm really happy with how the ramp is going. I think we will make some reductions in wait times, he says, today or tomorrow, so we can expect to see that wait time go down.
Yeah, so I think that's definitely the case. I think whenever no organization builds capacity to hit peak demand, so certainly they've been producing these devices for a while, and I think the other thing that Apple does well is they always meet or beat expectations. So while they may be setting expectations of 4 to 6 weeks, I wouldn't be surprised if consumers don't start getting them in the mail sooner than that.
What's your big takeaway when you look at the numbers, knowing that this is the quarter coming up? We're looking at people in line for their phone in Sydney.
Well, I think it's I think it's exciting for Apple. I think when you look at the iPhone X, that represents almost 70% of their revenue. I think it's going to be interesting to see the details of the earnings release, though, just in terms of what's the other category doing. They're the #1 watchmaker in the world. Are they going to? At what point are they going to break out devices like that? And certainly, I think there's also just a keen eye on their services business to see to what extent that's growing.
Which, by the way, it grew 34% year over year, the fastest it's ever grown. My question is, how long can they keep up that kind of growth?
Well, certainly it's always hard to get a big growth number, the bigger base there is, but there's only going to be more momentum in this market because the more devices I own, if I own a watch and a smartphone and a tablet and a computer and then the HomePod when it launches in December, there's only more incentive for me to sign up for services like Apple Music and other services that can work across all of these devices. So this ecosystem of devices begins to play in their favor.
Let's also talk about China. Apple returned to growth in China. There's been, some big questions about whether people are really going to want to pay up for a phone that's this expensive when you have alternatives that are half the price or less. I asked Tim Cook about China, and he said, we've returned to growth there. The Mac was strong, our best quarter in mainland China ever. Our services hit an all-time high in China. iPad grew double digits in China. So in addition to the iPhone, the other businesses are doing very well. And specifically in response to this question of whether people will buy the iPhone X, he said, we'll see, but I suspect that China will really love the iPhone X.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt they're doing well here. And I mean, he has more data than we do, and he'll probably talk more about that. But, this is a bit of a halo device, right? This is kind of like going back to the early generations of the iPhone 1 or 2 when people camped outside the stores. But I think what you may see, though, is there's a lot of demand for this product. But what we may see, though, is a slowdown in how frequently I refresh that. Right? At $1,000, this now costs what my laptop does. Do we refresh our laptops every 2 years, or are we going to see people get closer to a 30-month cycle rather than a 24-month cycle, so that they can justify the cost on a month-by-month basis.
Tim Cook told me he's pleased with the iPhone 8, 8 Plus sales so far, but are you at all concerned about the iPhone 10 cannibalizing sales of the iPhone 8?
Well, I think, Apple's good at this. This is what they do. They bring out a new product. This year is unique in that there's 2 new products, but then they're very good at adjusting the prices on the other products that have been out in the market longer, and they tend to still do well with those products.
So as we watch the rollout happening around the world over the next 24 hours, what are you going to be watching for?
We'll probably be watching, I don't know if there's like something specific we're watching for, but I'll be interested to see to what extent they release numbers on what the forecast is, what the pre-orders are, how much demand there is for the device. I hate to say, anecdotally, the demand seems to be very strong here in San Francisco.
That was Julie Osk with Forrester Research. Well, electric car maker Tesla still hasn't figured out how to overcome production problems that threaten its viability. The company won't make 5,000 units per week of its cheapest car until March. That is 3 months later than planned. Tesla also reported a record quarterly loss and cash burn. Coming up, the Senate and House grilled big tech over possible Russian interference in the U.S. election. We'll hear from one of the representatives on the House Intelligence Committee next. Plus, how exactly does a Russian group buy political ads on a platform like Facebook? We'll explain step by step. This is Bloomberg. It was another successful launch for SpaceX. This week saw the company's 16th rocket launch of the year. The rocket carried a South Korean commercial satellite into space. The satellite launched from Florida's Kennedy Space Center will replace an existing orbiter for KT-SAT. And as with previous launches, the launch rocket landed successfully back on Earth for reuse on a future mission. Well, as we mentioned earlier, Facebook, Twitter, and Google appeared before the House Intelligence Committee this week to answer lawmakers' questions about possible Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. elections. I spoke with Chris Stewart, the Republican representative from Utah who serves on that committee, and asked if he was satisfied with the response from the representative of the big tech firms.
Well, I think generally we're satisfied, and look, they have an enormous challenge ahead of them. When you look at how the Russians so brilliantly were able to manipulate public media, public opinion, they did it in such a divisive way, and they have an enormous challenge in trying to identify that, in knowing the best way to respond to that. Again, I think the executives that we had before us were very honest in their answers, but it's not going to be easy.
Do you buy their response that it's too technically difficult to tell users if they were served Russian ads or Russian posts?
Well, I don't know that I can answer that with real authority. I mean, I don't want to disagree with them. I certainly don't want to say that they weren't being honest or forthright with the committee, but I think the answer is insufficient. I mean, if what they told us is true, then we have to dive deeper and we have to be able to answer that question in the future. No, we do understand, and we have been able to develop policies and tools that will, stop that from happening in the future. So maybe that's the case now, but it's not sufficient for what we need in our future elections and other future policies.
These companies sent their top lawyers, but not their top executives. Will you be trying to speak with Mark Zuckerberg or Sheryl Sandberg or Larry Page or Jack Dorsey?
Yeah, it might be more publicly interesting to see and to talk with them. I don't think that we'd get any different answers. I understand why they sent their lawyers. In some cases, we were asking them very technical questions. In some cases, we were asking them very difficult questions. And I understand they wanted someone else to maybe take the heat and maybe be at the public face of this. But I don't know that they would have told us anything differently. And if that's the case, I don't think there's much advantage in bringing in Mr. Zuckerberg or any of the others.
Do you think we'll actually see regulation out of this?
I don't know. And see, that's the real question, isn't it? I mean, in my questioning to them, for example, they talked about fake news. Again and again and again, they talked about fake news. We're going to identify it. We're going to help the consumers understand this is fake news. And I'd ask them, what in the world does that mean? And who is going to decide what is fake news and what isn't fake news? I can tell you, if you talk to Mr. Trump, his idea of fake news is very different than someone else's might be. And if you're looking for a regulatory answer to this, that is an enormous challenge. approach. I think at the end of the day, you have to kind of trust the American people, that they will use some judgment, that they'll use a little bit of their own intellect in order to determine. That doesn't sound right to me, and this might. And by the way, in that spectrum, there are facts, but most of what we read or might view is some degree of opinion. And I don't know how you would try to regulate that. I think it would be enormously complicated, and the potential to turn that into a political bomb or a political tool is very troubling to me.
What about legislation or government cooperation?
Well, that's another issue altogether, and there are things that we can do and that we should do to further the cooperation between not just the government and private entities, but in many cases these private companies themselves. Many times their own terms will not allow them to share information with each other. I wish they would break down that barrier. I wish they would be more open. Hey, this person or this customer, this account, we've identified as belonging to a Russian troll or a Russian organization. I certainly wish they would share that type of information with each other. And the same thing true between the barriers between the government, especially the federal government, and these private entities as well. That's the type of information that could be shared and that should be shared, and many times right now it's not.
We've now seen indictments from the special counsel's Russia probe. You are doing your own investigation. Where does that stand and what's next?
Well, you know, the House Intelligence Committee has been looking at this for almost a year. And, you know, we started out looking at Russian interference with the election, and we've tried to stay focused on that. These indictments that we saw a few days ago really have nothing at all to do with Russian interference. They were financial, apparently, anomalies that happened, you know, years ago. And in some cases, I think the most recent was several years before some of these individuals were even associated with the Trump campaign. And, you know, if they did something wrong, if they truly were laundering money or doing anything illegal, they should be held accountable for that. Here in the House, we're really focusing on, was there collusion? How do we stop that from happening in the future? How do we protect our elections? You know, we're a year away from now from midterm elections. Europe is experiencing much the same thing. I think we need to be able to focus on those questions. How do we assure the American people that foreign entities or foreign governments aren't continually breaking down that foundation, that kind of trust in democracy and trust in our own elections?
So what do you need to see from the investigation in terms of evidence in order to act legally?
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that. I mean, if we find evidence that indicates that there was illegal activity, then we will pursue that. We'll write our report, and if necessary, we would refer that to the Department of Justice, or in some cases, maybe to the special counsel. Our primary objective is to report to the American people. We're not a law enforcement agency. Congress isn't. We don't, frankly, have the tools, and we're not really tasked with enforcing the law. Our job is to, in this case, to discover what happened and to tell the American people. Now, some people are frustrated at this point. You know, they've been saying collusion, collusion, collusion for a long time. The truth is that we haven't seen evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and any Russians, but we have seen some other activity that is concerning for us. We'll continue to pursue that, and then, once again, as quickly as possible, report to the American people. They deserve to know, and it shouldn't be in 10 years. It should be as quickly as we can while it's still relevant, and again, to stop that from happening in the future.
That was my interview with House Intelligence Committee member Representative Chris Stewart. And just a reminder, Bloomberg LP, the parent company of Bloomberg News, is developing a global news network with Twitter. Coming up, more reaction on the series of tech hearings in Washington this week, exploring the role social media played in the U.S. election. What are the next steps? Could regulation really work? And a reminder, all episodes of Bloomberg Technology are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV, weekdays 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to the best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. After weeks of waiting, the public finally got a look at some of the infamous alleged Russian-linked ads that appeared on Facebook, Twitter, and Google as part of an alleged attempt to influence the 2016 presidential election. But according to Senator Mark Warner, there is more to be worried about than just foreign-linked political ads.
These ads are just the tip of a very large iceberg. The real story is the amount of misinformation and divisive content that was pushed for free on Russian back pages, which was then spread widely on news feeds of tens of millions of Americans.
Bloomberg Technology Selena Wang, who covers Twitter, joined me along with Mark Bergen, who covers Alphabet, and Coastal Ventures partner Keith Raboy, to talk about the events in Washington. And we began discussing why the CEOs for these three companies did not attend.
I used to work in the Senate, and if they wanted the CEOs there, they would have scheduled it when he wasn't in China. This was a done deal between the Senate staff and the CEOs. If they really, Angus King is just speaking for himself. Like, he probably violated an agreement they had. This happens all the time with public company CEOs where they find a convenient date to schedule the hearings. So this is totally fraudulent.
The bottom line is, though, that this isn't done. They could still be asking for these folks to be coming to Capitol Hill.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess Google's defense is that Kent Walker runs their policy team probably a little bit more, could speak to the issues more clearly than Sundar might be able to, certainly more than Larry. He's probably much more involved in the day-to-day and setting a lot of these legal and security issues that they talked about.
And Jack Dorsey, he was just at a Square event in New York City. I just saw him the other day. He's definitely not going to be in D.C., and it is telling that he is running two companies. He only has so much time, and this is obviously not something he was dealing with on the day.
Now, another point that Senator Warner made an effort to point out is that these investigations aren't over. Take a listen to something else from Senator Warner today.
Do you believe that any of your companies have identified the full scope of Russian active measures on your platform? Yes or no?
Senator, our investigation continues. So I would have to say no, certainly not with certainty.
Mr. Regent?
No, and we're still working on this.
Mr. Walker?
I believe we have done a comprehensive investigation, but as Mr. Stretch says, these are ongoing issues and we continue to investigate.
So, Keith, we still don't know the full extent of this. And do you maintain that it's not important?
Well, I think everybody's just being totally hypocritical, and they're showboating. That's one of the reasons why the CEOs were advised, and they're all advised not to attend, is it just would have brought more attention. Like, most people are not going to watch hearings with general counsels testifying. Like, imagine, like, my parents watching general counsels, they'd be bored and turn on football. But if the CEOs show up, it's a more spectacular event. It's, like, very newsworthy, and people will tune in to see Mark or to see Larry, certainly, or Jack. And that's not what these companies want. They don't want everybody in America tuning in. So there's a very calibrated decision. They may eventually have to if they continue to misplay these cards. But everybody's being incredibly hypocritical. More people listen to terrestrial radio today than actually log into Facebook in the United States. Why are we calling all the radio companies?
You have to admit that Facebook has a big influence on
I'm not sure
think.
It really does. Actually, so there's no evidence of this, by the way. Show me one study that shows that the electorate in 2016 was more or less informed than Americans in history.
But I mean, I could push back and say, like, Facebook's earnings right now, they're blowout earnings a quarter. Google had their last week. They talked about having 100 million hours a day watched on YouTube.
Even Twitter has more users.
Google's talked consistently about, their pitch to advertisers, listen, we're better than TV. We have more granular reach. We have more targeted reach. And now they're out here saying, well, actually, the targeting, and they weren't that effective.
It may be effective, but in the grand scheme of things, all political advertising in the United States is 1% of Diet Coke's budget.
But
so let's be realistic about this.
Okay, ads aside, what about posts? I mean, people are still posting. In my Facebook feeds, I see plenty of posts about political candidates.
Oh, yeah, but do you read them?
I see them.
you see them, but then you look for the baby photos, which is what everybody's trained to do.
A post that's coming into your own curated feed from people who you think are your friends, part of your community, has a bigger impact than what you're hearing on broadcast, on radio.
That's absolutely true, but they're my friends that are sharing this, which is the fundamental issue. My friends have the right to share any content they want unless it violates the law of the United States, and nobody in Congress, and nobody in the Senate, and nobody in the House, and nobody in America should be trying to stop that.
Wait, I just was looking through the page the House put out of 65 pages long about the Russian bots on Twitter and the accounts that they couldn't identify. And clearly what today demonstrated, these companies are flat-footed, right? They weren't. Twitter has been aware of this bot problem for a long time for various reasons, hasn't taken actions.
And they're also concerned about fake friends on Facebook.
Right. And now it seems like Congress is actually waking up to what's really happening on these digital platforms.
Facebook, I think the user expectation is that people are real and it's the real world identity. And so I think there is something that Facebook should do about that because it's inconsistent with the platform's design and the real vision of the company. Twitter has encouraged fake accounts or pseudonymous accounts, as they talked about, to encourage dissidents in various other countries. So Twitter, I think a user knows knows that it's not necessarily the real person, and so the expectation is pretty reasonable. So I think it varies by user expectation what the company should do about it.
And what about if what they're sharing is fake news?
I don't think there is a definition of fake news that people are going to agree with, particularly the political context, which is infused with a lot of First Amendment protections. Like, I have the right to say Hillary Clinton's a crook. That isn't fake news, and if anybody tries to suppress that, this country would be just as bad as Russia.
But some news really is fake news, whether it's, how many people died in the Las Vegas shooting, for example.
Sure. So I think there are things that are purely facts, but most of what people are objecting to in fake news is a mix of fact and opinion, and that gets very precarious to regulate or stamp out or have Facebook edit.
That was Bloomberg Technology, Selena Wang and Mark Bergen, as well as Khosla Ventures partner Keith Raboy. Meantime, Facebook disclosed that a Russian group spent $100,000 on ads to influence the 2016 presidential election. How did they do it? Well, it's actually more simple than you might think. Bloomberg's Sarah Fryer filed this report.
Facebook tells us that a Russian group spent $100,000 on ads to influence the 2016 presidential election. How do they do it? It's actually very simple. There are only 3 things you need to run a very sophisticated advertising campaign: a Facebook account, the ad itself, and a credit card. Facebook's website holds your hand through the rest through its self-service advertising system. Let's say you have an ad that you want to show to gun owners in Pennsylvania. Simple. Facebook can route your ad to everyone who lists their home state in Pennsylvania and has purchased a gun or read posts and pages about gun ownership. You can target ads based on race, political affiliation, education level, pretty much anything. Facebook can target specific demographic groups because it has so much information on its users. The articles they click on, the pages they follow, the things they like, all of it is recorded for later targeting by advertisers. There's also the information the users provide themselves, like what town they're from and what school they went to. This self-service ad purchasing tool is how the Russian group called the Internet Research Agency ran its campaigns. The ads are meant to stir up controversy over immigration, race relations, gun rights, and more. Facebook says that before ads are distributed, they're sent for review, but it's a mostly automatic process that doesn't really block controversial ads based on the content of the ad, which means the Russians were able to run thousands of ads with factually incorrect information and inflammatory political speech, which Facebook users couldn't tell came from Russia. And the Russian group created fake accounts and pages to run the ads, which looked like they were just coming from concerned US citizens. Just a little bit of money goes a long way. With $100,000, the Russia group was able to reach 10 million people. Remember that swing states in the election were won by mere thousands of votes.
I don't want anyone to use our tools to undermine democracy.
Facebook recently said that to prevent election manipulation in the future, it plans to hire 1,000 humans to help review ads that are politically or racially targeted. But they still haven't said exactly what the review parameters will be.
Bloomberg's Sarah Fryer reporting there. Coming up, another record quarter at Facebook, but the company warns it will ramp up spending this year on security. And the merging of tech and Wall Street has ramped up thanks to automation and AI. We'll hear from Citadel Security's Chief Information Officer on the role tech plays at the firm. This is Bloomberg. New York City could very well be home to Amazon's second headquarters. According to a new study by Reese, the Big Apple tops the most probable list, mainly due to its extensive mass transit network. The study scored cities based on factors Amazon outlined in its proposal. San Francisco ranked second for its large number of tech workers, and Washington, D.C. was third on the list. Well, Facebook reported another quarter of record sales, despite a tough week on Capitol Hill. Revenue rose 47% to more than $10 billion in the period, far above the top of the range of analyst expectations. David Kirkpatrick, CEO of Techonomy and the author of The Facebook Effect, Keith Raboy, partner at Khosla Ventures, and Debbie Williamson, principal analyst at eMarketer, join me to discuss the results.
Well, you know what? At eMarketer, we are more about looking at revenue. And You mentioned at the top of the newscast, these quarterly results shredded expectations. They shredded ours as well. So for us, it's all about revenue. It's all about up and to the right. And everything that they've reported this quarter is higher than we had anticipated.
That said, David, you've taken a slightly different tact today, expressing concern about Facebook shares, whether they'll continue to go up as a result of all of this controversy. What's your take now seeing the results?
Well, Facebook shares have a lot of reason to be strong. The reality is the very success of the Russian effort would probably reassure advertisers that Facebook is the right place to advertise, sadly. So they're not going to stop magnetically attracting more and more ad dollars. The question is, how much are they willing to spend, and how much kind of social capital are they willing to expend, and corporate capital, emotional and sort of reputational capital to do the right thing? I think they really have to step up and take a fundamentally different attitude toward their role in society, and it goes way beyond election meddling. I haven't seen that yet.
Would you agree?
No, I think this whole story is completely hypocritical. The CIA has been doing the same thing in elections all across the globe for the last 50 years. The idea that the United States can do things, but Russia suddenly is evil for doing the same things is ridiculous. The big mistake was by Obama when he declared that Russia and Putin were our friend and ridiculed Romney when he was running for president for predicting all of this. If the president of the United States thinks Russia is our friend, why should Facebook think Russia's evil?
But now that we have evidence that Russia was interfering in our election via these platforms, do you think these platforms should do anything about it?
Well, I think these platforms should do the same thing that TV does, and they should be subject to the same laws, which basically require transparency. They don't allow foreign agents to buy ads to affect intentionally the elections, federal elections, but that's a very small category, and it's not really what people are talking about in the news. The news came out today that Russia spent about $48,000 on Facebook, which is a rounding error on a rounding error on a rounding error for Facebook and for even the Clinton-Trump expenditures. Clinton and Trump together spent $81 million. Russia spent $46,000. It was the most efficient $46,000 in the history of advertising if it really had impact.
David, what's your response to that?
Well, I think what Keith said about the CIA, et cetera, is pretty much right, but I think it's beside the point. The fact is, these companies, Facebook in particular, have a social weight that a commercial enterprise has never had in America or the world. And we don't really have a governmental, regulatory, or kind of citizen response to that. And political meddling is just one piece. Senator Warner today named a number of other things that he's certain are equally problematic: financial scams, other kinds of fraud, meddling of various types in social behavior. This is not going to stop. Even if the whole Russia thing went away tomorrow, Facebook would be facing massive questions about its future as a platform for the public debate, and why a company ought to be the one making decisions about what happens there.
So, Keith, Mark Zuckerberg, speaking now on the Facebook earnings call, says that Facebook is working with Congress on legislation. So even the companies are taking some responsibility.
Well, I don't think they're going to really support any radical legislation. They may allow some incremental transparency. I think Facebook, to be true to itself, should require real-world identity. I think the Facebook platform is predicated, Facebook's success is predicated on real-world identity. So I think stamping out fake accounts is a very good thing, and it's something its users would expect. But I don't believe that Facebook should be subject to any incremental regulation that doesn't apply to TV, to newspapers, to pamphlets, to billboards.
Deborah, we got the first hint today from Facebook's testimony, the testimony of the lawyers, that Instagram was also affected. What sort of significance do you think this will affect on some of the other businesses under the Facebook umbrella, whether it's Instagram or WhatsApp?
Yeah, well, you're right. It was new news that Instagram came into this. I think it's possible that we'll see other platforms involved as well. I have to say, though, that there's a lot of things going on. Everything is new. It's always exciting to watch what Facebook is doing and what role it's playing. The debate over Facebook, I think, is not going to end with this Russia investigation. And I do agree that there is a lot that Facebook has to do in terms of its role in society and its role in understanding and helping people understand what's news and what's not news, and what's fake news and what's not fake news. So there's many things going on that I think we'll see over the coming months related to Facebook and all of its companies.
Keith, Mark Zuckerberg just said he's dead serious about the Russia problem.
Well, he should be serious about the Russia problem, but ultimately users are voting with their feet that they want to share this, and Facebook should be enabling users to share what they want to share. National Enquirers also existed for 50 years. Basically, Facebook has become an online version of the National Enquirer. Most of the stuff in the National Enquirer is completely fabricated and false, but people like to buy it and read it. Not surprisingly, like to share similar stories on Facebook. There's nothing wrong with that. People like to be entertained. If you want a serious news platform, which maybe Mark wants to create, you may have to make some editorial judgment there, but that's not really what Facebook users think they're getting from the product.
Coming up, one financial firm is getting serious about machine learning and luring tech talent. We go behind the scenes with Citadel Securities. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. GoPro has tapped one big name in sports to serve on its board. The company has named Golden State Warriors president Rick Welts to the board, saying that his leadership, creativity, and passion have made him one of the most respected individuals in the NBA. The Warriors were one of the first pilot partners to try the GoPro Fusion, its device for virtual reality video. Welts will be GoPro's 8th board member. Well, with machine learning and automation, the use of new technology has never been more important for financial firms. As Chief Information Officer at Citadel Securities, Nawaf Battar is responsible for implementing the market-making technology driving the securities business at Citadel, but he also got his start in Silicon Valley. He talks about his journey to Wall Street with Bloomberg's Eric Schatzker.
Well, that's an interesting story. As you observed, most of my time has been in the Valley. Companies like Network Appliance, Cisco, Juniper, most recently VMware. And the thing that was most interesting to me about Citadel Securities is that they afforded me an opportunity, they afforded me a license to innovate. And it's one of the few things that really excites a technologist, being able to develop and deploy leading technologies in networking, storage, compute, and bringing it all together at the same time. The second thing that was interesting to me is that I found such a high concentration of talent. People talk about hiring the best and the brightest. What I found at Citadel Securities is we've set the bar so high in terms of who we bring in that we are actually bringing in those types of people. And having those types of people around you up-levels your game, and I found that to be the case with me. And then the final thing, which was a bit of a surprise, was we are able to deploy new technologies in days and weeks, as opposed to the months and years that I've been accustomed to. And technologists just love seeing their creations come to market.
You make it sound like this is a faster-paced, more exciting environment than what everyone thinks, right, is the Holy Grail.
I mean, candidly, it's like as much a tech firm as any company I've ever worked at. And, so tremendous amount of excitement and a tremendous amount of innovation.
What specifically about your background, your skills, your expertise did Citadel need?
Well, Citadel Securities, we value a diversity of experiences. And if you only have people coming out of the Fintech sector, for example, they think a certain way. Bringing in people with different perspectives from different companies and different experiences, that allows us different insights, which we can then apply to our core mission.
But I'm thinking, you've worked in networking, as you mentioned, you worked in storage and more. What are you applying most here?
Well, one of the interesting things is that we're bringing them all to bear. Literally, networking is fundamental to our business. Compute and analysis is fundamental to our business. The way we acquire and store data is fundamental to our business. Unlike other places I've been, we bring it all together and use it all at once.
Help explain why. Help people understand the role that technology plays in a market-making firm like Citadel Securities.
Right. So our core mission, of course, is to provide liquidity, to provide for a stable, efficient, transparent market, and we use technologies in many different ways. I'll give you a few examples. In equities, for example, we do analysis that allows us to provide the best liquidity, particularly in illiquid markets. It enables us to optimize our costs so we can provide a more efficient, cost-effective effective transaction to our clients. It enables us to fulfill our obligations as a designated market maker on the New York Stock Exchange. For the 1,400 or so symbols that we represent, we use our technology to enable a prompt and smooth opening and close. And then, on the institutional side, we're able to stream live pricing. Our technology enables us to do that as well.
So if technology is, call it the X factor, right? One of the principal things that separates good executors from bad ones, I have to believe there's something of an arms race going on, right? More, better, faster, more powerful.
Certainly it applies to the infrastructure that we deploy and the technology we deploy, but perhaps even more importantly, it applies to the people that we hire. And so we look to bring in people from tech centers and tech companies across the world.
You're doing more of that.
We are doing more of that just this year. And again, given a high bar, this is an impressive number. Just this year, we've hired over 20 people from traditional tech firms. We're actually looking to connect with people even before they graduate. We've held 20 datathons across the world, and we're able to connect with those students in that forum, and we've been able to hire some of those as well.
Where are the happy hunting grounds? Where do you want to hire people from?
I mean, the obvious, we'll hire good people from anywhere in the world, but for traditional tech people, the concentrations, of course, are in Silicon Valley, in the Seattle area, in Austin, Texas.
At the obvious, like at the Googles, at the Facebooks, at the companies of that nature?
And also many of the startups as well. And, as I said at the beginning.
So you're raiding Silicon Valley?
Absolutely, but we're being very selective about it.
Talk to me, Nawaf, about the innovations, right? Technology is all about innovation and I suppose disruption as well, terms that people like to throw around. But talk to me about the innovations that you're implementing now and anticipate implementing that will prove to be disruptive in securities trading.
Well, clearly, data is at the heart of what we do, as is technology, and our ability to analyze and, glean insights from that data is fundamental. People, no doubt, talk about cloud computing all the time. Cloud computing provides you an elasticity that can be a force multiplier to a business. It allows you to expand into resources for periods of time when you couldn't possibly afford to own them, not cost effectively anyway, on an ongoing basis. But those are the types of things that we look at.
What about machine learning?
Machine learning is definitely the buzz du jour, and it's something we deploy today.
How?
A lot of folks don't understand it. They might not understand how it's distinguished from artificial intelligence. I think of machine learning as a state of the art, if you will, in artificial intelligence. What you're able to do is look at past patterns of data and correlate them with known outcomes that occurred in the past. I actually like to use the expression, those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. So we can train a model based on what happened in the past, correlate it to the known outcomes that were associated with that, and then use that technology to predict what would happen in response to an unanticipated set of circumstances, and improve the model over time because we provide feedback. That's the learning aspect of machine learning, and we do deploy that in many areas of our business to get more insight into the decisions that we make.
That was Nawaf Battar, Chief Information Officer at Citadel Securities, speaking to Bloomberg's Eric Schatzker. And that does it for this edition of the Best of Bloomberg Technology. We will bring you all the latest in tech throughout the week. You can tune in every day, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. And remember, all episodes of Bloomberg Tech are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV weekdays. That is all for now. This is Bloomberg.